Hello there, and welcome back to the channel. Ad Mike here, and today we are going to be discussing the state of the Star Trek franchise. And this is among several announcements by CBS, but I'd just like to start by going over some of the things. First of all, I'm a huge original series fan, and I've seen all three of the original seasons, all of the episodes, multiple times, probably about 10 times each at least. I'm a fan of the Next Generation, although again, original series is still my favorite. I like Voyager, even though it's kind of meh. Deep Space Nine is okay, and Enterprise is okay. I don't really have any problems with those series, and I don't think they necessarily tarnish or take anything away from Star Trek as a whole. However, the most recent foray of Star Trek, from the films to the new TV series is on CBS All Access called Discovery, have rubbed me the wrong way since inception. And the reasoning for that is this. So first let's just tackle the beginning of it, which is the J.J. Abrams films, which is what eventually spawned this. And the first one that came out in 2009, which saw the reimagining of the original Enterprise crew, I didn't really have so much of a problem with it. I had a few points of contention. Thought they had some decent fan service moments in there. The Kobayashi Maru test with Kirk, where you get to see him, cheat on the test, like what they allude to in Wrath of Khan. And I didn't think that movie was that bad. I thought that it did some good things. I think it did some good things for the franchise. I did not like the fact that they gave Spock a love interest, because that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Given what his character is in the original film, they made him far too emotional, and I don't think that works very well, especially when comparing it to the Nimoy interpretation. Then you have Star Trek Into Darkness, which I consider the Star Trek Last Jedi. I don't think it was as decisive as The Last Jedi in terms of what it did to the franchise, but I think that it was enough of a backlash because it was basically just a blatant and cheap ripoff of the things from Wrath of Khan, and it didn't add anything new to the franchise. And here's the thing: if you're going to go with an original villain, that's one thing. Like, look, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But you're just going to dredge up Khan and stick him on screen and say, "Oh, Star Trek fans are going to love it." No, that is not how that works. It has never been how it works. And I'm sorry, but nobody can play Khan like Ricardo Montalban. Nobody will ever top that. No one playing that character. And I like Benedict Cumberbatch. I like him in Doctor Strange. He was good in Sherlock. He's been in several movies too that have been pretty good. The Imitation Game. He had a role as Whitey Bulge's older brother, or actually, I forget if he's older or younger brother, from Black Mass. But I don't think he's a bad actor. I think he's a very good actor. But he should not have been playing that role. I think he should have been an original character. And that they should have found some way to get him into an original character role in a Star Trek film instead of doing what they wound up doing. And then Star Trek Beyond was just, it was there. Wasn't anything extreme, wasn't anything over the top, just there. And now, of course, the search for like a Star Trek 4 is still up in the air because I believe they've lost both Chris Hemsworth and Chris Pine, which was supposed to be the continuation of that, which I think it is dead in the water now. I think there's a Tarantino Star Trek film that's currently either being written or is in development that's rumored that might still be on the table, but I don't know about that right now because I know he's still doing his Charles Manson film, so that's up in the air. But to get off the movies, the television show is what really kind of irks people from the side, and I don't blame them for being irked about it, for being Star Trek fans, because Discovery is it's woke Trek is essentially what it is. That's the entire idea of the series, is that it is woke Trek. And the writers have said so. The writers have come out and said so. They have said that the Klingons are based on alt-right people. They're supposed to be genetic purists and a bunch of all this other insane crap. Look, the Klingons are a warrior empire. That is what they are built on. They expanded a lot on it in Star Trek The Next Generation with the Worf character, and you got a lot of insight into it. Why don't you watch that instead of watching CNN endlessly? And then maybe you can write a good Star Trek script. Second part about it is that I think people started to realize after the first season, or nearing the end of the first season of Discovery, that the show was not doing well. And that's probably an understatement considering how much it probably cost to produce. And so they decided, all right, season 2, we'll throw in a bunch of Trek characters. So they'll toss in Spock, they'll toss in Captain Pike, they'll toss in some other characters. But at the same time, look, just because you're tossing in old characters doesn't mean you know how to write them. And just because you're tossing in those characters doesn't mean they're being written well. There are problems with these characters when you put them in because you're not being conscious of the original series and the source material that those characters come from. And you're thinking, oh, I can just change them whatever way I want. No. I shouldn't say no. You can, but it causes problems. And that's very evident in Discovery that it causes problems. And I'm not the type of person, I'm not going to nitpick about certain things in Discovery. Like there's a scene, I think, where they have a Gorn skull, and the Gorn aren't supposed to be introduced until many, many years after when Discovery takes place, and yada, 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 whatever. I get that, but I'm not a stickler for that kind of thing. But when you're screwing up established characters, that's a problem. And now CBS has recently been announcing that they're going to do a bunch of other Star Trek series. Specifically, there's going to be 2 animated series. One is coming out for Nickelodeon, and one is coming out, I think it's for the CBS All Access series, that's going to be a comedy series called Star Trek Lower Decks. And I guess they're saying it's going to be a comedy series of some sort. Sounds a bit like the Seth Green series they were going to do for Star Wars. It was called Star Wars Crossroads, that eventually got shelved by Lucasfilm because they didn't want Star Wars to turn into a joke before they then, of course, made it into a joke. Just not a very funny one. So the series that are going to be coming out, and then also they have a Captain Picard series that they're developing with the return of Patrick Stewart, which should be interesting. But you have that. But the thing that's starting to get on my nerves a little bit is that you have this children's series that's coming out, which is the other animated series, which is supposed to be which is going to be produced by the same people that did like the Lego, or it's going to be written, by the same people that did Hotel Transylvania and the Lego Movie and a few other smaller projects. But here is the issue with this: is that I don't necessarily believe in the idea of producing something specifically for children. Because I don't. The way that entertainment thinks of children is that they are these gullible little idiots, and you sit them down in front of a screen and you show them loud noises and constant action and this and that and the other thing, and they'll just eat it up no matter what, as long as it's aimed at the proper demographics. And look, I grew up in the '90s. I grew up when there was legitimately great animated series that were on television. I grew up with Batman the Animated Series. I grew up with Spider-Man the Animated Series, the X-Men cartoon. You can look back at comedy series back then, too. You can look back at stuff like The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. That was a good show. And a bunch of other stuff that was on back then. But see, the things that are most memorable are the things that actually had a story you could follow instead of just a bunch of random stuff that was meant to keep your attention. Because that's really what these are. The series that get developed today, for the most part, are attention series. They're series that are meant to keep your attention on it for as long as possible, but it is not substantive. And that is a problem because it doesn't give a good narrative to what's going on screen. And when I say that's a problem, I don't necessarily mean that's a problem in the sense that it's not doing well, because it will do well. Because, again, it's meant to draw attention, and children have a very short attention span. The problem is that I have a problem with treating children like how they want to treat children. I think if you give kids a narrative, they'll follow along with it, and they'll get it, and they'll keep going with it eventually, because that's just the way that kids are. Eventually, they will catch on to stuff. They learn very quickly, especially nowadays. If we could learn to follow narratives in the 90s, kids today can learn how to follow it. I mean, they can work an iPad at 2 months old practically. So, but that's a problem I have with this, and I think that's a lot of what these guys make is they make stuff that's very visually stimulating, but it doesn't have a story to it. It doesn't have any substance. And the thing is, back in 1967, when Star Trek premiered, the original series, majority of the people that watch it were kids. A lot of them, my father being one of them. I think he would have been 8 or 9 years old when the original Star Trek, and he's the one that introduced me to it. And I started watching the original series, and I loved it when I was a kid, and I still love it now. I still watch it on Netflix. I'm glad they still have it on Netflix because they don't have the movies on there. But again, to go back to a point, the reason why it was so entertaining was not just because it was colorful, because it did have a lot of bright colors. It was a color television show in the 60s, which was rare at the time. Before that, a lot of science fiction shows didn't. They were just in black and white, like Lost in Space, which had its run in the mid-60s. But the thing is that each one of the episodes that you watch in the original series, even if they're corny or goofy, they still have some kind of a message to them, and they're still all at least original. They don't feel like they're rip-offs of one another unless they're episodes that are connected. You can't go from one episode of Star Trek to another and say that they're exactly the same or that they're clones of one another. It was a different story every single week for the 3 seasons that it went on, and you can even say that for Next Generation as well. Next Generation had they had 5 seasons, and they had still plenty of diversity and plenty of character development. The only constants were the Enterprise and their crew and getting to know those characters. But there was a constant narrative where you put those characters in varying situations and see what happens. And the thing was, each one of those situations was something that was completely different, and it was completely out there, especially at the time. And people want to say, "Oh, Star Trek, it was always," I criticized Discovery earlier for the woke factor. And they say, "Oh, the first interracial kiss and all that stuff in the original Star Trek." Look, there's a difference between when the original Star Trek did something and the studio censors said it was a dumb idea and not to do it, versus today when it's something that's encouraged and it's something that makes half of America make their eyes roll. Because it's not good storytelling. And that's the other thing about Star Trek is in a lot of ways it was escapist fiction. Because it was about this almost utopian type of future where mankind had developed to the point where they could spread out in the universe and start surveying planets and going out and meeting other alien species and things like that. And it was this fantastical element that people didn't really have in sci-fi, at least not on a consistent basis back then. So the thing is, the new Star Trek has lost the narrative. They don't have it anymore. They never understood it to begin with, as far as I'm concerned, because they're not putting you out anything new. They're not staying true to what Star Trek is, which is smartly written science fiction that's really for all ages, not just for kids or adults or white males that are 42. It is for everybody. And again, that's something that they've sorely lacked the understanding of. And I think that's why they just need to let this franchise go for a little while. Just let it go for another 10 years or something like that. And maybe if somebody comes along with a good enough vision of the future, let them do something and see how it works out. But for right now, just leave Star Trek alone. It does not need you, CBS. It does not need you, CBS writers. What it needs is it needs to be left alone, and it needs to be left alone so that people remember the good and stop forgetting the shit that you have been shoveling into their face for the past 3 years. So now that we're done with that rant, thank you for listening. Hit the like button and hit the bell for notifications. And if you have any opinions on either these new series or Discovery or on Star Trek as a franchise in general, feel free to leave them in the comments. And remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?